not as the world gives. You give us the wonderful commandment to love one another as you have loved us. So God, please open our hearts and help us to understand how deep and wide and long and high is the love of Jesus. God, please help us to hear your call to love. Draw our heart near to where your heart is. Help us to care about what you care about.
I just wanna be near your heart.
Draw us near to your
There's
heart.
nothing like your love.
There's nothing like your love, Jesus.
There is nothing like your love.
Sing that one more time. I just wanna be where you are.
I just wanna be near your heart. There is nothing like your love. There is nothing like your love. And I just wanna be where you are. I just wanna be near your heart. There is nothing like your love. There is nothing like your love, Jesus.
You may be seated. We got a special. Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me. We have someone to help us to collect the offering this morning. Stephen, could you lead us in the prayer?
Okay. Dear God, thank you for today and thank you for everybody here. Please bless our hearts and any money that we give to the ministry, and just help us to really have that heart to give to you. It's not about how much we have or how much we can give, but it's what you can do with what we can give to you. And so we thank you, and just we want to have the appropriate heart. So help us. In Jesus' name, amen.
All right. This morning we have a special guest speaker. Harrison and Destiny have been coming here for quite a while. Very excited to hear him speak. They're both Bible teachers at school. Harrison, actually this semester or year, has not had as many opportunities at school. He usually teaches Bible every day. So here's a great opportunity for him to share with us from God's words.
Come on down.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. All right. So today, I'm not really a preacher. I'm more of a teacher, as Mark mentioned. And so it's going to be a little bit different. The way I like to teach is to have a little bit of, interaction and to, get you guys thinking about some different topics. And this is a topic that has been something that's been on my heart for a while and something that I've been thinking about. So we're going to get into a couple different Bible passages. We're also going to ask some questions. We're going to think about some different topics and really get into why we believe what we do. And so we're going to start off here actually with a reflection question. And so what I want you guys to do, this is how I normally start off teaching, you guys thinking a little bit. And so instead of just me talking the whole time, I want you guys to think about this question a little bit. So we're going to be talking about some different topics that have polarizing views, different dilemmas that we face today. So I want you to think about a few topics or issues in politics, theology, philosophy that have two clear sides. And why do you think these topics often divide Christians? So you can actually go ahead and talk with a couple of people around you. We have a small group, so we can learn from each other. So go ahead, take a couple minutes to discuss this with your neighbors, and I'll, we'll talk about it together. All right? Everyone got it? All right. So circle up with a couple of people around you. Yep. And talk about why you think some of these topics. Yep. Yep. So go ahead. All right. Seems like everyone's kind of talked about a bit. Would anyone like to share a couple of things, maybe a couple of topics that that kind of divide Christians up, and why you think that happens? Anyone want to share? Yeah. Okay. Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Yeah, speaking in tongues is definitely one that you see churches divided on. Mm. Sorry. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's all these different topics that divide up believers in these different denominations, and then you kind of get set in that, and Christians start to fight one another, and that becomes your whole identity more than what brings us together. Oh, it's okay. Yeah. No, that's fine. Yeah. No, I like teaching in a way where we all get to share a little bit. So, if there are any other, if someone else would like to, yeah. No. What? I didn't see it. Any other topics that you guys came up with? Something that, and a kind of a reason why we see this? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's. Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Oh. Okay. Oh. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. Any other ideas? Anything else?
God is a spirit, and God said to talk to you from spirit to spirit. So that means when you're talking in tongues, you're talking through your soul to God directly. And it happens every time, not one of the time, but 100% of the time. Because he is the Spirit, and he asks for you to talk to him in spirit. And that's why a lot of people talk in tongues. No one can explain it, but I mean, it's just amazing. When I talk in tongues all the time, going down the highway. And I get answers from that. I don't know where they come from, but they come. So I don't see a problem with it. Baptists do, that's fine. But that's not what the Bible says.
Okay.
The verse that he's talking about is in I think it's 1 Corinthians 14:2. It says, "For one who speaks in a tongue speaks not to men but to God, for no one understands him, but he utters mysteries in the Spirit."
Yeah, yeah, and so that's definitely one topic where we see believers divided up onto different sides. So today we're going to be talking about some of these topics that it seems like Christians fall on one side or another, and this gets into not just biblical interpretation with tongues, but also with politics, with theology, with lots of different topics. And so we're going to be looking at Jesus's responses to a lot of situations where he's caught in a trap, where he's caught in a false dilemma. And so the title of this topic is Finding a Third Option. Because a lot of times when we see this dilemma where there's two clear-cut sides, sometimes there's another way of looking at it, and Jesus was very good at finding this third option. And so we're going to look at this. I'm going to share some stories from our Destiny and I's travels that I think relate to this, and then talk about ways that we can, when we come across a situation or a topic, like speaking in tongues or like another topic, like politics, that we can, as Christians, look for another way of thinking and pointing towards something even more important, maybe within that topic. So one thing that I like to do when I'm teaching is to show lots of pictures. And so whenever there's a story that comes from, it mentions the place where this is, I like to show pictures in class. And so as I'm going through this, you'll see different pictures of places from the Holy Land, just to kind of set up to have a good mental image of what's going on. We always, when we think of a story, we kind of picture what's going on. And it's good to have that as an accurate mental picture with what is with the geography that's actually in the land. And so the first story that we're going to look at is with Jesus teaching in the temple, and it says that he comes down from the Mount of Olives. So this is a picture of the Mount of Olives, actually looking from the Temple Mount, and so it's very green. You come down the hill here, and then the Temple Mount itself. When you look at it from the Mount of Olives, maybe get this a little far away there. This is in the snow in the winter. They do get snow there in Jerusalem. And so this is the Temple Mount area today with the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. And this is actually looking down from the Mount of Olives. So this is kind of the picture that you want to have in your mind as we're thinking about Jesus teaching here in the temple. Actually, this is the reconstruction of what the Temple Mount would have looked like during Jesus' time. What's left today is just the bottom part of that. The superstructure was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. But where Jesus is teaching is probably about on the southern side of it. The laser pointer isn't, you can't see it there, but on the stairs, the southern stairs is where a lot of the teaching took place, going up the main entrance into the temple complex. And so that's where Jesus is teaching here, actually where Jesus is caught in this difficult situation. And so this first story that I want to talk about is one that you've probably heard of before, but we're going to look at it in a way of seeing how Jesus responded to a difficult dilemma here. So this is from John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. You probably, like I said, heard this story before, but we'll go ahead and read through it a little bit here. So, but Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground. Oh, sorry. First, there's a slide before that. Okay. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, which we just saw. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees caught and brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. So here, this is a sort of a Bible interpretation question, a theological question, letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. Should we follow this command directly? It's also a political question because, the Romans were in charge here. The Romans were the ones in authority, and you weren't allowed to execute anyone without the Romans' permission. Which is why you see Jesus' trial taking place before Pilate, and then back and forth all over the place, trying to get permission, basically, to execute someone. So they're trying to catch him in a trap here, to pick a side here that no matter what he says, it's probably not going to go over well. And he has a very interesting response that, if you guys remember from the story. So then we get Jesus' response. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." And so it's interesting here that Jesus doesn't fit into the two categories, that are kind of there, where either we stone this woman, we follow the letter of the law, or, just let her go. There's really no reason for this. Instead, he kind of points to a third option where he has all the people standing around and the woman who's accused reflect on their own hearts. And so in this way, Jesus makes it less about an ideological, theological question and more about an individual, personal relationship. So he actually gives the crowd a decision to make, a chance to make the right decision on their own, which is an interesting way of solving this trap that he's in. And so I think that's one really good example of where Jesus, he's caught in this dilemma, and then he finds another way of looking at it. And it really makes everyone learn from it in a little different way than what they expected. So that's one example. There's another story that I want to share that also takes place on the Temple Mount. So here is another picture of, this is the Western Wall, and so you can see this is, again, part of Herod's temple complex, the substructure there, and so the temple would have stood right on top of that. So there's another picture of that. And then a view from the south, so the southern stairs where most rabbis taught was in this location, going up to the temple complex. So just to give you another mental image of what's taking place here. I'm kind of skipping around different stories that we have in the Gospels, but still taking place here at the temple. And actually, where this is, as you're looking up, is the Al-Aqsa Mosque today. But this is where the royal stoa was, where the treasury was, where all of the administration and taxes, where the temple tax was collected, and kind of a more administrative type of building up on top there. And so that actually relates to this next scenario that we have. All right, sorry. And so we get in Matthew 22, 15 through 22, and actually a couple of passages after this, a series of traps that the Pharisees and Sadducees are trying to catch Jesus in. And so this story you've probably heard of before. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. "Teacher," they said, "we know that you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?" But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." they, oh, sorry. They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. And then he said to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, so they left him and went away. And so here we have a very political question, of course: should we pay taxes to the Romans? And so here they're trying to catch Jesus into either siding for, Jewish independence, what the Hasmoneans have been fighting for, and what later the Zealots would be fighting for, and then he would be an enemy of Rome, or should he, say, oh, it's okay to pay taxes to Rome, and then accept kind of this oppressive foreign power. And so he's caught in a difficult dilemma here. This would be a tough one to answer. And so instead, Jesus kind of doesn't really quite answer the question as far as setting up one of these sides. Instead, he points to something more important. He actually turns the minds of everyone in the crowd away from materialism and towards, something more important. Serve God. Give to God what is God's. And it's less about, this political question. And so it's kind of an interesting way that he answers it, that he kind of gets out of this trap. If you go further in this chapter, you see the Sadducees then try to trap him in this weird scenario where it says that there was this woman who was married to a man, and then he died, and so she was married to the next man and the next man 7 times, and then the question was, well, then whose wife is she in the afterlife, in the resurrection? And Jesus has an interesting response to that, and basically says, well, you don't really know anything about the afterlife. And then he ends his response with this phrase, God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Basically saying, you don't need to be worrying about this so much. Just worry about serving God here on this earth. Worry about what's actually taking place here. So, and then with the greatest commandment after that comes just after this passage. So these series of traps that Jesus finds a way out of by being creative, looking at something more important than the 2 sides that the world has set up. And I think that's important. That's what we're going to kind of learn from here today. Another story I want to share is actually not from an example that Jesus gave, but actually from his teachings. So we're going to look at a couple of passages here on the Sermon on the Mount. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So here, this is a picture of the Sea of Galilee. It's actually, it's a lake. It's about 30 miles around. This is a picture that Destiny took at sunset, camping out there. And then this is another picture of the Sea of Galilee. And so this is in the area near the Mount of Beatitudes where Jesus probably and traditionally would have been giving this Sermon on the Mount. And so that's kind of the mental image we're looking at as Jesus is teaching this really famous sermon that we have. So in Matthew 5, 38 and on, we see this series of very powerful, very important teachings that Jesus gives. He says, "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you." And this actually continues on and to where Jesus is talking about this other phrase, right? You've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. And so here Jesus is setting up a couple of different scenarios where there's someone oppressing you. There's someone forcing you to do something that you don't want to do. And there's kind of these implied 2 options. Well, you can either give in to this or you can fight back. And instead, Jesus turns it around to where the responses are more on even the person who's doing the oppressing. So, for example, when if someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. By doing that, if you can imagine that scenario, it's giving the person who's slapping a second chance at deciding, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done this. It's like kind of showing them the error of their ways, but also giving them a chance to to make the right decision again. The same with if someone forces you to go with them 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. You know, that whole phrase, going the extra mile. Well, it's not just about, putting in this extra effort. It's, giving, again, the chance for this person who's this oppressor who's forcing you to go with 1 mile, saying, I'll go even further. I'm here to serve you. I'm here to help you, which is kind of an interesting way of looking at that. And so we see then that Jesus, ends this with saying, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Again, there's kind of these two sides that the world sets up. You fight on this side or you fight on this side. But as Christians, you're supposed to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And I think that's a very powerful, very interesting message that we have from Jesus, and something that we need to hear a lot more, I think, in our society today. The last biblical example that I want to give is actually not from Jesus, but actually way before with the story of Joshua and Joshua at Jericho. This is the site of Jericho, and if you go there, you'll see it's very small. It's a very small town. So the story of walking around the city, it really only should take you about 5 or 10 minutes at the most. It's a very, very small town. And so this is the modern city of Jericho, surrounding Old Testament Jericho. New Testament Jericho is a little further away. This is a little bit of a close-up on some of the excavations that you have there. Only about 13, 14 miles from Jerusalem, but very different climate. It'll be 90 degrees in Jericho at the same time that it's snowing in Jerusalem because of the elevation change. But just an interesting fact to add in there. But we know, we've probably heard many times in Sunday school the story of Jericho and Joshua and this miraculous victory that takes place. What I want to focus on, though, is actually something that's a little bit different, that we have in this passage leading up to the circling around the walls and the conquest of Jericho. We have Joshua and this dialogue with this army of the commander of the Lord. And I want to point out some interesting things here that we have in this dialogue. So now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up and asked him, "Are you for us or for your enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down on the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" And so you can imagine this taking place where the battle lines are drawn. Joshua is in his camp. They're getting ready for this siege, and he's getting these instructions from the commander of the army of the Lord. And it's an interesting response that we have here when he asks, "Whose side are you on?" So I know I've been talking for a while, so I want you guys to talk about this and think about it a little bit. And so I have a couple of questions here. Oh, I think clicker's a little bit out of range here. So a couple of questions here, again, that you can talk about within a couple of people here. You'll kind of see where I'm going with this. But is the commander of the Lord's army's answer surprising to you? You can look back at what his response is. Do you think that God chose a side in this battle? You would think that, based on all of the, experiences of Israel coming out of Egypt and throughout the Promised Land, that he would have a side in this battle. So what do you think is going on here? And then the second question, which I want you to think about a little bit, why do you think it is significant that Rahab was someone who was saved, right, is in the genealogy of Jesus, David, Solomon, and so on. She's in this long lineage that we see in Matthew chapter 1. So Rahab leading up to this important lineage. So go ahead, and I know these are a little tougher questions, but go ahead and think about it and talk about it with a couple people near you, and we'll see what we have. All right? Go ahead. so I think most of you guys have had a chance to talk about this a little bit here. Would anyone like to share their responses to either of these questions? Looking at this interesting response we have from the commander of the army of the Lord, and then connecting this with Rahab. Anyone want to share? Thoughts? It's like in class. In class, I'll have like a set of popsicle sticks, so I just randomly select people to go. Yeah.
I'll go.
Go ahead. Yeah.
It kind of did surprise me, actually. Because he says no. So that is interesting that he didn't really kind of answer it.
Yeah, so this dialogue that we see, Joshua is asking him, whose side are you on? And his response is neither. You would expect his answer to be, well, I'm on Israel's side, right? Because
Right.
Israel came out of, there's all these miracles coming out of the Exodus, was provided for throughout the wilderness wanderings, and then we have this interesting.
I had a question
response.
too. So
Yeah.
if he's the commander of the Lord's army, would that make him Michael?
Oh,
Or is
I
that
don't know.
reading too much into it?
I mean, I don't know.
Oh, okay. We know it's
yeah,
an
we
angel.
don't
an
have the
angel of
name
the
here,
Lord.
and actually in the
Right.
Old Testament we don't have an emphasis very
Okay,
much on
I didn't know.
angels, but
Thank you.
this is kind of an exception, or we see commander of the Lord's army, which is interesting.
Well,
Um,
oh, never mind.
so it's okay. Right. Right. He's there exactly. He's on God's side, whatever that is, and so you could interpret this as well. Maybe he's just identifying himself as a soldier, or not as one of those soldiers. He's just saying, "Well, I'm on God's side," right? Not necessarily making a claim that that I'm not on either sides or either armies. Not trying to support either army, but I think we see kind of this glimmer of this message of peace that we have throughout the story, especially then when we get into the story of Rahab. Did anyone have an answer to that second question with Rahab? It's a tough question. Yeah, Steve.
Here we go with the mic. I think that it's significant because it shows that God doesn't look at the things that man looks at, and so man would look at Rahab and say, well, she was a prostitute, she's not worthy to be in the lineage of Jesus, and that's true, but I just God looks at the heart, and we look at kind of the outside, and so it just, but I think it's something that's really redeeming because for a lot of people to have that, because a lot of people get stuck in what their family has done, and oh, my family's been alcoholic, or my family's been in a sexual industry or something like that, and then it's they don't feel like they can get away from that, but the truth is that you can get away from it, and when you're made pure by Jesus, then your old past is as far as the east is from the west, so it's you don't have to be well, I used to be in that sin, so now I'm not as good, even though I'm forgiven. Well, that's not really true. So.
Yeah, so we could look at this and see, Rahab as a prostitute, and look at the sinfulness and see, well, that's in Jesus' lineage. David did some awful things too. Solomon, all of these guys, you have a lot of sin in this lineage where Jesus is a part of this, and leading up to the story of Jesus. One of the things I also, actually, did you want to share? Yeah.
We
go.
also talked about how she was a non-Israelite.
Mhm.
Although through her faithfulness, she was brought into Israel, but not by birth,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
By the open door of God to someone who by faith and with a heart, but still a non-Israelite. So when you say, well, which side was he on? Was he on Israel's side, or was he on Jericho's side?
Mhm.
Well, he was on her side, right?
Mhm.
Even though she was from Jericho.
Right.
So,
Right.
Anyone who comes to him in faith and is willing to follow the Lord, he's on their side. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so we see, Rahab is the only one mentioned by name as an individual that was actually saved from this battle. Everyone else was killed, destroyed. You know, the walls come down, everything is burned. The site is supposed to never be inhabited again. And so Rahab is the one person, you know, her and her family who are actually saved. And then she's in this lineage of Jesus, which I think is pretty significant, and kind of helps us then understand what's going on, I think, with this this response from the commander of the Lord's army. Neither. Well, not really necessarily. God doesn't fit into these two sides that we have on these two armies, you know, and the person who was saved from this is the person who's chosen to you know, carry this lineage of Jesus, you know, which I think is a pretty powerful statement. So, yeah, thank you guys, and thanks for thinking about that and sharing. So I want to switch gears here, just you know, just for a little longer here, and share a couple of stories where I think you know, we've experienced this sort of third option among Christians, especially in the Middle East. If you don't know, Destiny and I, you know, met in Israel. We lived in Israel there. I got to do my master's degree. I lived there for 3 years, and while I lived there, I worked at a shop. This is the picture of the shop here, very small, Zach's Antiquities, and you know, we would sell ancient coins and pottery and things like this from the time of the Bible. It was a really great way of learning archaeology in a way that was hands-on. You know, you actually experience it. You don't just, you know, listen to it. And so there were a lot of really great experiences I had there for, you know, learning archaeology, but also just learning about people. You hear every different language, lots of different cultures, and something that I, you know, experienced in the shop was, you know, Zach he's a Palestinian Christian. By the way, if you don't know, most Christians that are in the land of Israel are Palestinian, not Israeli. And so he hired me there to help in the shop, and you know, when I was there, it was unfortunate because I saw that there was a lot of racism, there was a lot of hatred, or like picking one side or another, where they saw that if Zach was Palestinian, they wouldn't talk to him, but they would talk to me because I'm white. Even though he knew a lot more, I was learning from him, you know. And so that was really unfortunate to see that. You know, most of the time, though, you know, 99% of the time, you know, the things are very peaceful there. And, you know, Christians, Muslims, Jews get along and work together. But we did see different times when we lived there where tensions would start and people would pick a side. An example of this was in 2014. There was this kind of buildup of tensions between Palestinians and Israelis that build up until it ended up in all-out war with Gaza, and it was like this 40-day-long you know, conflict that took place. During that time, we had the missile sirens going off, and it was like fireworks. You know, these are the Iron Dome missiles that were intercepting, and so it was a really hard time to be there because you saw all these people who used to get along now splitting to their sides because, you know, they have this long history where a lot of them have had family members killed. This is very personal for them. It's not just, you know, an ideology. It's, you know, it's personal. It's in their family, and so it was unfortunate to see this. But it was interesting that we saw great examples of really what Christians should do in a situation like this, when you have Christians living as a minority in a conflict like this. Because, like, working in Zach's shop, I remember there was one customer that came in, and he was an American volunteering with the Israeli army. He came in and was looking around through the shop, and Zach was saying, you know, we want peace. We're hoping for peace. And this customer looked back and said, no, we want to get rid of all the Palestinians. Like, this is not, you know, this is not what we want. And so, you know, Zach, who is Palestinian, he has gone through, you know, so much. His father was in prison. He has all these stories of being in jail and discriminated against just because of the way he looks. You know, and personally, he would have been, you know, he's pro-Palestinian. But when it came down to it, he prayed for peace. He wanted peace. He didn't want anyone to be hurt in this. And I think that was a very powerful thing, even when we had customers coming in with that attitude, just to say, no, we're praying for peace. That wasn't just to make more sales or anything like that. It was a real, a radical position actually to take, to say, we're not on this side, we're not on this side. We want everyone. We know that God cares for everyone, and we're praying for peace. And so, actually, there's another example of that too at the church that I went to. There's this Messianic Jewish believer who was there. It's very rare to have Messianic Jewish believers in Israel, but she had been there in Israel since 1948. She was in her 90s, and she was, had experienced all these things from this from this conflict. It was personal for her with the family, and when this conflict was going on, she got up in front of church, and I was a little worried. I was like, oh no, it's going to be a statement against Palestinians. This isn't going to be good. But she got up and she said the same thing. We're praying for peace. We pray for our Palestinian brothers and sisters in Christ. And so that was a really powerful statement that you see. And we saw many examples of that, actually, living in the Middle East. And I think there's a lot that we can learn here in the U.S. From that. Here's if you didn't see, there's a picture of Zach on Christian Quarter Road. So that's where the shop is. Another story I wanted to share is from Egypt. And Destiny and I, we taught together in Egypt at a small Christian school there. Again, you have a good number of believers, a lot of Coptic Christians that live in Egypt. And they're kind of, again, caught in the middle of different conflicts that are taking place. And when we were there, there was, in 2017, there was a bombing that took place on Palm Sunday, where a couple of churches were bombed, and a lot of people were killed by ISIS that took responsibility for this. And one of the things that I wanted to show you guys is, and what we experienced from the Christian community there, was this radical forgiveness. Even though, and kind of this, not this eye for eye, tooth for tooth mentality, but loving your enemies and praying for those who persecute you. This is this next slide, this is a quick video clip that, just to kind of preface it, unfortunately the clip doesn't show the question, but they're interviewing this woman who had her husband was killed in the bombings, and the question that the interviewer asks is, what would you say to the person who did this? And the response is very interesting, and then it's really neat to look at the response of the interviewer, or the anchor man who's Muslim, and the witness that this kind of gave to him, his response to this. So it's just a quick video clip. I don't know if you can. No, you can't play it. Yeah, I don't know what to search for. If you can. If not, it's okay. I know I'd probably be. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. We can come back to it later. But what happens here in this interview, he asks, what would you say to the person who did this? And her response is, I would say, we love you, and I forgive you, and all these things, as she's crying. And the response of the anchorman is really interesting. You see, Egyptian Christians are made of steel. He goes on this this speech where he's like, you don't understand. If your enemy knew how much you loved them, they would never do these things to you. And so it was a really powerful witness. And we saw Christians living in a minority like that really made a very powerful stand in the way that they forgave and they loved even their enemies. You would expect two sides like this, but instead, I care for the people on that side. I care more about them than this division. And I think that's a really powerful statement. So if it comes back, that's okay. If not, we can move on. That's fine. Yeah. I think, yeah, there was a question there. Before I get to this, this question, I just wanted to say, so, I contrast that then with, coming back to the U.S., where we had a very different experience, with Christians here in the U.S., where a lot of times, even when there wasn't a reason to fight, people fought. You find ways to divide yourselves up based on spiritual pride, us versus them mentality. And I think this was definitely evident, last year and a half ago with elections. I don't want to get too much into politics, but, I work at a Christian school, and we saw more bullying, more hatred, more kids where we had to get them out of class just because they were being so disruptive because of politics, because of one side or another. When we lived in California, there was this mentality that you had to be a Democrat in order to be a Christian. Here in Texas, it tends to be the opposite. You have to be a Republican in order to be a Christian. And it was unfortunate to see where, political parties are using Christians for their own purposes and really causing this hatred, this division over something that's more ideological. And so, that's the exact opposite of what we, experienced in the Middle East. And so it's unfortunate to see how many Christians are participating in that. And, last year was a rough year to teach if anyone was teaching during that time or interacting. You could just feel all the hatred and the tension and everything building up. And, I want to come back to kind of what's my main point with all this, and that's, when we come across these dilemmas where you're forced to pick a side as a Christian, a lot of times, using Jesus' example, it's good to look for a third option. And I want to come back to, this verse that we've seen talked about a couple times actually in recent weeks, about in Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I think this is a part of that, not necessarily fitting into the boxes that the world wants us to fit in, but looking outside of that. These are just some rhetorical questions here, but just to think about, how have we conformed to the false dilemmas in our society? There's so much pressure to fit into a certain box. And I think it's okay sometimes to say, maybe think outside of just these particular boxes that the world has given us. And to think about how Jesus would have responded to these dilemmas. Jesus lived in a complex society with lots of different political views. There's lots of tension, and he was faced with very similar dilemmas. That if you apply that to our time today, I think you could imagine where Jesus what he would say about the political debates last year, what he would, or 2 years ago, what he would say about all of this division among by politics and theology, where many of these times he found a third option. And I think that we need to do that as well. So then the difficult thing becomes, how do you actually do this? Because, it takes a lot of mental effort because it's very easy to just say, yeah, I fall in this camp or this camp. It's harder to then try to imagine a different way of thinking. And so, I think that God gave us brains for a reason. He gave them to us so that we can, go through the difficult mental process of trying to find a third way and find a way that follows after Christ's example. And so, a couple of things that I think we need in order to find another option, another path, like creativity, not conforming to the options that this world gives us, but looking for a third, looking for another solution, not just seeing it as black and white. Well, there's lots of other options of colors out there. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a right or a wrong. It just means maybe we haven't found the right answer. Maybe that why there's so much tension and why no one's really made any progress is because there's another way of looking at it that's out there. I'll just say in scholarship, that happens, this is like the number one thing you look for if you're coming up with like a dissertation topic or a thesis topic or something like this. You look for something where you see two sides that are, that really makes up the majority of scholarship, and no one's really made any progress. Because that gives you an opportunity to, okay, maybe there's a different way of looking at this. And I think it takes some creativity to find that, but we should have that mentality a lot of times when we come across these different debates. As well as critical thinking. Many false dilemmas end up being oversimplified. Like I said, they don't make any progress. And then this polarization leads to incorrect assumptions, hatred, closed-mindedness, and it limits our solutions. If you've ever, I don't know if you've seen the documentary Social Dilemma before, but it talks about how social media has kind of led to polarization where it only feed you things that you're already in agreement with, and that leads to a spiral of more and more being trapped in your own mindset and not looking outside of that. And so that leads to, I think, incorrect assumptions. You only then look at evidence from your own perspective, and it leads to just, you don't necessarily get to a correct answer because of being closed off and only on one side of things. So that happens a lot, I feel like, in the U.S. today. So that's why, I think it's an important message to look past that, to look beyond that. And I think really looking at Jesus' examples, we should look at, when we're finding the third solution, it's not necessarily always about, the topic at hand, but it's also about the people that are there. And so when we see Jesus' responses, he looked at the individual over the theology, over the politics. He always pointed it back to an individual relationship where it wasn't about, paying taxes to Caesar or not. It was about serving God, or it wasn't, about this fighting on this side or that side. But instead, it's about praying for those who persecute, for loving your enemies, and praying for those who persecute you. And so, looking for ways to show love and compassion over commitment to a side, I think, is really important, and is an important thing to think about the people that are a part of this, not just the view, not just to see it as us versus them, but as real people. And the last point I want to bring up is that it's okay also to say, I don't know. And I've kind of learned this as I've gone along. I think I grew up in a mentality where, you had to believe exactly this way, and this is exactly, and that should be, you should stay the same all throughout your life. You hold firm to these principles. But I think, it's okay to accept that as you learn more, as God brings more experiences into your life, that those change. And it's okay to say, well, I don't know. This is a tough situation. This is a tough question. And to not necessarily say, oh, I fit in this box or this box, but I don't know yet. I'm going to think about this a little bit more. I think that's actually a responsible way of handling some of these difficult questions. And then it does lead to more thinking about the person than necessarily the side that you're on. So I just wanted to share this, because I do think, this is it's important to, come to these topics with humility, with, thinking outside of kind of what the world wants to put us in, the category that the world wants to put us in, and to try to look at Jesus' examples and, let our minds be transformed by Jesus, by his example, by our relationship with him, not by what the world expects. And I think that's an important message. So that's all I have. I'll go ahead and pray to close this out, and then we can go. So thanks. Lord God, we just thank you for this day. We thank you for bringing us all together here as a body of believers. Lord, we just pray that you would help us to be able to make wise decisions and to be able to think in a way that's honoring to you, to use the brains that you gave us to look for a third option, to be able to not just conform to the patterns of this world, but to be renewed, to be transformed by you. And I just pray that you would help us to be able to honor and serve you, Lord, in everything that we do. Pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Don't forget that next week we've got a special lunch. There's a sign-up sheet right out in the foyer as you walk in. And if you will all stand, let's sing one last chorus of I Want to Do Where You Are.